Have you personally been affected by austerity?
Well, I think the whole country has...
I'm asking about you.
Well, it's not about me, it's about
My
the whole
question's
country.
about you. How have you been affected? Have you been adversely affected?
Well, what I would say is that we have had a period
I don't know why it's funny.
where...
A lot of people have had a terrible time with austerity.
Eddie, I'm not laughing. I'm just questioning your question because...
Well, you leave the questions up to me. What's the answer to mine?
My answer is that all of us have been affected by the difficult decisions that had to be made. But what we have done is we've limited those difficult decisions. We've made sure we target money on those on the lowest incomes.
It would be okay, wouldn't it, to say you haven't been affected?
Well, I don't think it's a good question. I don't know what it means.
Well, I won't comment on your answer. Let me ask you a different question. This money you've talked about for the police today, £100 million, it's only for 1 year, isn't it? And it falls far short of what the police themselves have asked for.
What we're doing is we're targeting in the specific areas where...
What do you think the police would do?
High knife crime.
They say it's not enough.
Well, what we've done is we've targeted in the areas where there is particular issues with knife crime.
I'm not asking where it's being spent, I'm talking about the amount.
Well, I think 100 million is a significant investment in year. And we also put more money into the police budgets this autumn in the budget. But we recognise there is a specific issue with knife crimes. There are terrible things happening on our streets.
Yes, there are.
And we need to do more, which is why we have taken the special
expedient... the 300 million the police want?
Well, we will be looking at police budgets along with all other budgets at the spending review for the next 3 years, and that's the proper time to look at it. But because this is an exceptional issue, we do recognise how concerned the public are, how difficult it has been for the many families, that we should find that extra investment. We've found extra money from the reserve to pay for that this year.
Do you see any link between the austerity, which you personally haven't suffered from, and the knife crime you're now trying to stop?
I think there are all sorts of factors that have led to increases in knife crime.
Is austerity one of them?
The important things we grip.
Is austerity one of the factors that's led to the increase in knife crime?
I certainly think we do need more police on our streets, which is why we are investing that extra money. But Eddie, you have to respond.
Now you're answering a question I haven't asked.
Let me give you a full answer, which is that we have to respond to what's happening in our country now and make sure we're addressing the issues. Now, the people that cause knife crime, Eddie, are the people with knives. Let's be clear about that. There is a responsibility from the people who have engaged in those criminal activities.
There's no link in your view. This is the question I've asked you, which you haven't yet answered. I'll ask you again. Is there a link between the government's austerity programme and the rise we've seen in knife crime?
I do not have a clear view on what are the causes of the rise in knife crime. It's something that we're looking at across government to examine what are the causes, what can we do to help, how can we address these issues. But I think it's wrong to always say that it's about the money precisely you spend on a service. It's also about how we spend it. It's about how we get the best results. And some of the money that we're putting in today is going to be used for intelligence-led policing to make sure we are addressing this problem in the right way. But Eddie, the answer to all Britain's problems is not simply to spend more public money. Many of these problems are deep-rooted and we need to think about different ways to address them. So, for example, the Home Secretary has launched a programme on early intervention. We're looking at what more can be done in schools. We're looking at what can be done through the health service.
Of course, yes,
and why did we have to tighten our belts? The reason we had to tighten our belts.
Well, let's not go back. Hold on.
I think
hold on a second.
Because the previous government hugely overspent.
Well, if you're interested in talking about 2008, let's look at what the Chancellor talked about today. Growth, the forecast for growth, the independent forecast for growth that the government relies on, is as good as it was in 2009. So you complain about the record of the last government, and your growth this year will be 2009 levels.
I mean, we are facing various issues. We're facing a global slowdown.
Well, I think we can hear that.
So Germany, for example, has lower growth forecasts than the UK. We also have an issue with the limbo around Brexit, and one of the things I'm very keen to do is get more support for the Prime Minister's deal so we can move on with that and we can release business investment. But I completely recognise, Eddie, we need to get growth up in this country, and it's one of the things we're focusing on in the spending review. How can we make sure that the money we're investing in projects like infrastructure is actually going to generate economic growth?
Why is growth so bad?
As I say, and in fact the OBR referred to this, there is a global slowdown going on. I don't think the global issues with trade have helped. I think there's more we can do in this country to release economic growth. I think we need to build more houses. There was a number of announcements at the spring statement about that.
So the slowdown, well, it was more than a slowdown in 2008. That was Labour's fault, but this slowdown is global.
I didn't say the slowdown was Labour's fault. I said the excess spending of public money, which led to such a high deficit, was Labour's fault. I acknowledge the financial crash was a global phenomenon that affected the US, it affected Europe, and it affected the UK. The problem was that the Labour government spent in good times and bad times and left us with a huge deficit.
What do you think of having another EU referendum?
A very, very, very bad idea.
But people can change their minds, can't they?
But they were told in the referendum in 2016 that their vote would be implemented, and the reality is the vote needs to be implemented.
But what about the people who've changed their minds between then and now?
I don't think people have changed their minds. Everyone I speak to, I have, that's true.
Right.
In the other way, though, Eddie.
Oh, I see.
But certainly the people I speak to, many of whom voted Remain, say, please, Liz, just get on with this. They don't want another year or more of limbo, asking the same question again. They just want us to deliver it.
So people can change their minds, but only if they go from Remain to Leave.
But the point is that I've changed my mind in favour of what people voted for.
Right.
What we're talking about is a whole bunch of people who haven't changed their minds. Most of the people out campaigning here on college greens are not people who have changed their minds. They're people who don't like what other people think, and they've decided to campaign against it.
Charles,
this is not a massive revolt of the people who voted for Brexit. This is people who supported Remain and aren't happy with the result.
Well, people who, like you, have changed their minds and they just simply want to express their view in another referendum. They haven't changed their minds.
Everybody out there, I bet, hasn't changed their mind.
Really?
Well, you can go and ask them.
Well, you're closer. Have you spoken to any of them?
I was in a rush to get to this interview, Eddie.
But not enough of one. Let me ask you about what Boris Johnson... Just a little, but I'm not whining about it. Boris Johnson...
You can blame Cathy Newman at Channel 4 who kept me holed up in Parliament.
I will remonstrate with her when I see her next. I want to ask you, because we talked about knife crime and police resources. Boris Johnson was on LBC this morning. He was asked about police resources. Here's how he chose to respond to the question.
An awful lot of money, an awful lot of police time now goes into these historic offences and all this malarkey, and £60 million I saw was being spaffed up the wall on some investigation into historic child abuse.
Any thoughts?
I do think it's very important that we investigate historic child abuse, and it's interesting that the level of reporting of child abuse has gone up and more children are coming forward because they're hearing about these cases. I think it's vitally important. That's not to say I don't think there are areas where resources can be reprioritised. And I think I wouldn't suggest historic child sexual abuse is one of them, but I do think dealing with the knife crime issue that we've got at the moment should be an absolute police priority. What
effect do you think it would have on someone who has suffered child abuse but hasn't reported it, and you can well understand the reasons why they might not, to hear a former Foreign Secretary and, let's be honest, Conservative leadership hopeful talking about historic offences, all this malarkey and money being spaffed up the wall, and let's not go, I think people know what the word means, spaffed up the wall in this context. What do you have to say to Boris Johnson about how he expressed himself?
Well, I'm a believer that people should be able to express themselves in the way they see fit. Boris is a backbencher. He's entitled to give his opinion.
Oh, wow.
As I've said, I don't agree with it. But I'm not going around saying that people shouldn't say things, because I think one of the problems we've got in Britain is that a lot of things politicians say or the public say, we end up with a huge culture of talking about what they said rather than talking about the real issues. And the real issue for me is those children or grown-ups who have suffered that appalling abuse and making sure we deal with it, not talking about Boris Johnson.
This is, as you've outlined, this is something you've been thinking about for some time and have taken a great deal of time to consider. What was it? Was there something that pushed you to do this now?
Well, actually, I was advertising your radio station on Sky a few minutes ago because actually what tipped me over the edge, I mean, to be honest with you, the decision was fundamentally made, but an interview yesterday with a consultant neurologist, Jacob Rees-Mogg on Nick Ferrari's show, I couldn't believe how disrespectful, the disdain and the look of Jacob Rees-Mogg when he was speaking to that consultant neurologist who had rung up and asked a legitimate question, a professional man, an expert, somebody to respect. And what you saw there was a display of the contempt for somebody who was actually trying to put patients, people first. And if you're going to say what the straw that broke the camel's back, it was that interview yesterday on LBC.
And here is that clip.
Morning, David.
My name's Dr. David Nicholl. I'm a consultant neurologist. I was actually involved in Yellowhammer and drafting the plans of mitigation for a no-deal Brexit in March. My question to you, really, having been involved in writing the plans of mitigation and having whistleblown because I felt they were unsafe, is what level of mortality rate are you willing to accept in the light of a no-deal Brexit?
Well, I don't think that there's any reason to suppose that a no-deal Brexit should lead to a mortality rate. I think this is the worst excessive project fear, and I'm surprised that a doctor in your position would be fear-mongering in this way on public radio.
Can I remind you, I wrote the plans of mitigation.
In mitigation? Well, you didn't write very good plans if you hadn't worked out how to mitigate, had you? It's fortunate they're being written by other people now who are serious about mitigating rather than Ramona's.
Well, except to stop you there, in the Sunday Times yesterday, the Royal Colleges who were involved in contact with Department of Health have not yet been approached.
I think it's deeply irresponsible, Dr. Nicholl, of you to call in and try and spread fear across the country. I think it's typical of Remainer campaigners, and you should be quite ashamed, I'm afraid.
So, Philip Lee, that's what did it for you?
Yes, and the person who should be ashamed of that interview is Jacob Rees-Mogg. You know, you can say it with a posh voice, but if it's BS, it's BS.
Does the Secretary of State for Transport, Chris Grayling, take personal responsibility for the awarding of a £14 million ferry contract to a company that's never run a ferry? We've been asking that question every weekday for 3 weeks, and we think it's an important question because it's about ministerial responsibility. When things go wrong, is a Secretary of State responsible, or can they say, I blame my officials, it was nothing to do with me, Gov? The Department of Transport awarded this £14 million contract to run ferries between Ramsgate and Ostend in the event of a no-deal Brexit. The company which got the contract is Seabourn Freight. There was no bidding process. Seabourn Freight does not own any ships, and as I say, it's never operated a ferry service. At the time, the Transport Secretary, Chris Grayling, defended his decision.
Well, it's a new start-up business. I mean, government supporting new British business, there's nothing wrong with that. We've looked very carefully at this business. We've put in place a tight contract to make sure that they can deliver for us. But I don't see any problem with supporting a new British business.
Last year, Chris Grayling refused to take personal responsibility for the chaos on the railways when a new timetable was introduced. Millions of journeys were disrupted. Was he responsible? Chris Grayling said it was tough for any politician to overrule the advice of the professionals. When he appeared on this programme last month, I asked him, are you responsible when things go wrong on the railways?
Well, I think the answer is it depends. If an engineering train digs up a set of points in the middle of the night and causes chaos in the morning peak, I don't think anyone would look to the Secretary of State for that.
It depends. Well, not everyone agreed with that. As the Times reported last September, the head of a cross-party committee of MPs said the Transport Secretary was primarily to blame for the mayhem that led to the cancellation of almost 800 trains a day. It was also claimed by MPs that Chris Grayling was trying to divert attention from their critical report. So what about the awarding of this contract to this company? Does Chris Grayling take personal responsibility? Or did he find it tough to overrule the advice of the professionals? Every day since January the 2nd, we've emailed the Department for Transport asking the question. And every day they've not answered it. Sometimes they've not even responded. So we started the Chris Grayling Jar of Truth. Every day that we didn't get an answer from the department, we put £1 in the Chris Grayling jar. Now, there are 16 press officers at the Department for Transport. We now have £18 in the Chris Grayling Jar of Truth. We've no idea why it's so hard to get an answer to a yes or no question. But tonight, Tonight we have news of a development. As it happens, Chris Grayling was the government minister given the job today of doing interviews about the Brexit debate. This quite often happens. There's one minister who's put up for interview everywhere. You may have heard him on LBC, seen him on Sky News. He was on BBC Radio and TV. When we heard this was happening, we thought, let's try and ask him the question. LBC's political editor, Theo Usherwood, was offered the chance to interview Chris Grayling this afternoon, just before 2 o'clock. Theo did the interview on Brexit, and at the end, face-to-face with Chris Grayling, he asked him the question we wanted an answer to. Now, here's the intriguing thing. So we recorded that interview, and we're about to broadcast it to you. The Department for Transport, who frequently ignored our emails, never responded. They've called our office twice today saying, when are you broadcasting the interview? When are you broadcasting it? We told them to listen between 4 and 6. So if you're listening at the department, here is the full, unedited exchange.
Do you take personal responsibility, because some of our listeners on LBC want to know, for the decision to award a ferry contract in the event of a no-deal Brexit to seaborne freight?
Well, my department has placed a series of contracts, and of course I lead the department, with ferry operators in case we need capacity in the event of a no-deal Brexit. We've got big contracts with Brittany Ferries, a big contract with DFDS, and a small contract with Seaborne Freight, who are aiming to start...
14 million pounds.
No money's been paid, and no money will be paid unless the service is delivered. This is something people don't seem to understand. We haven't committed to paying any money unless a service is delivered. And surely that's sensible. Give a chance to a new business, but don't pay them unless they deliver.
But this is a company that's never run a ferry service before.
Well, it's a start-up business. It's a new business. Should government support new business as well as big business? Of course. But we're not paying anything until they actually deliver a service.
But just to be clear, going back to your first answer, this was a departmental decision, or was it your decision? Are you taking personal responsibility for it?
I take responsibility for the decisions my department takes, and that's why we decided to support a small business, but not to pay any money unless the service is delivered. And surely most people would say that's common sense. We're giving a chance to a new business. If it can't deliver, we don't pay anything.
So you're taking responsibility then?
Well, I lead the department that let the contracts. We have let a contract to a new business, a contract I support, because we won't pay any money unless the service is delivered.
But if it goes wrong, Mr. Grayling, sorry, final point on this. If it goes wrong, is that going to be on your head as the Transport Secretary?
Well, if it goes wrong, we won't pay any money.
But it could end up in a very difficult situation where you'd end up with long queues up the motorways going up to Ramsgate because this is a ferry service that doesn't work.
Well, but the contracts are substantially with two big established operators, Brittany Ferries and DFDS, who are going to be delivering services in other ports. This is a small part of the contract where we've given a chance to a new business. If they can't deliver, then we don't pay them any money.
Theo Usherwood talking to Chris Grayling here, just in case it wasn't completely clear. Here is the critical part of that conversation again.
But just to be clear, going back to your first answer, this was a departmental decision, or was it your decision? Are you taking personal responsibility for it?
I take responsibility for the decisions my department takes.
What do current members of Boris Johnson's cabinet think of the idea of Parliament being shut down to push through a no-deal Brexit? Well, we don't know. We asked for an interview with anyone in government, and our request was declined. And you wonder to yourself, what must the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, think of all of this? Here's what he thought on June the 10th.
And then there's this idea from some people, you might have heard of it. There's this idea from some people that to deliver Brexit, we should suspend our parliamentary democracy, that we should prorogue Parliament. But that goes against everything that those men who waded onto those beaches fought and died for. And I will not have it.
Matt Hancock on June the 10th, before he was made Health Secretary by Boris Johnson. What does the Work and Pensions Secretary, Amber Rudd, think of the idea of suspending Parliament to push through a no-deal Brexit? Well, we don't know. But here's what she thought on June the 16th, talking to Sky News' Sophie Ridge.
I mean, Boris Johnson's gone further than that as well. He hasn't ruled out proroguing or suspending Parliament in order to push through no deal.
Which is absolutely outrageous. The idea of leaving the European Union in order to take back more control into Parliament And to consider closing Parliament in order to deal with that is the most extraordinary idea I've ever heard.
I mean, Rory Stewart has said that he would be prepared to set up another parliamentary session across the road. Would you join him?
Well, I'm not going to use the same colourful language as Rory, but I certainly feel just as strongly as he does. It is a ridiculous suggestion to consider proroguing Parliament. And for a start, it would involve approaching the Queen. And that, of course, is an absolutely... nobody should consider doing that. But we may have our difficulties as MPs arriving at a decision, but the idea of involving the Queen is completely wrong.
Amber Rudd speaking on June the 16th, before she was appointed Work and Pensions Secretary by Boris Johnson. What must the Business Secretary, Andrea Leadsom, make of all of this? Well, we don't know. But here she was speaking to Sky's Beth Rigby on June the 6th.
It was felt that it would not be something workable to prorogue Parliament. It's certainly not something I would seek to do anyway.
You wouldn't want to, though, would you? I mean, it completely subverts parliamentary democracy.
Exactly.
You were the leader of the House.
Exactly. No, I'm passionate about parliamentary democracy, and so yes, it was my job to make sure I understood the implications of different outcomes, but certainly not because it was something I was attempting to do.
You think it's a bad idea? Just to be clear, you think it's a bad idea?
Yeah.
Andrea Leadsom speaking on June the 6th. She was subsequently appointed Business Secretary by Boris Johnson. What must the Culture Secretary, Nicky Morgan, make of all of this? Well, we don't know. But here she is speaking on July the 10th to ITV's Paul Brand.
What did you think of Sir John Major saying today that he would actually be willing to take that to judicial review if Boris Johnson tried to prorogue Parliament?
Well, I thought it's extraordinary. I'm a great fan of Sir John's, and I think that if it were to happen, I still think, and the One Nation hustings, we quizzed both Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt about prorogation. Neither said it was an option that they would be wanting to pursue. I think it would be extraordinary. I think it would lead to a constitutional crisis. But I'm very pleased that we have a past Prime Minister like Sir John, who is still willing to stick his neck above the parapet and say, I would not put up with this.
So you heard there from the last 2 months the views of 4 people who are now in Boris Johnson's cabinet. Matt Hancock said of proroguing Parliament, I will not have it. It goes against everything the D-Day soldiers fought for. Amber Rudd said it was absolutely outrageous, the most extraordinary idea she'd ever heard, a ridiculous suggestion. Andrea Leadsom agreed proroguing would subvert parliamentary democracy. She agreed it was a bad idea. And Nicky Morgan called it extraordinary and would lead to a constitutional crisis. So far as we can gauge, none of those 4 people have said anything today about what Boris Johnson has done. So we don't know what they think. Perhaps they agree with what Boris Johnson has done. Perhaps they privately disagree, but they like being in the cabinet. I don't know. Matt, Nicky, Amber, Andrea, you're welcome to call me and tell me your view. 0345 60 60 973.
There's a major vote winner. So this is what I want to know. How will it be funded? Which tax will it come from? I want to know from the horse's mouth, since you've now become a Liberal Democrat right now.
So, thank you very much. I think that's a manifesto pledge that I personally am very committed to. I was the childcare minister for a while, and having 2 young kids myself, a 5 and a 3-year-old, I know how expensive childcare is. Most parents are looking for flexible, affordable childcare, and this manifesto pledge is to do with that. We have said in terms of how we're going to be funding a lot of our education in schools, mainly out of our 50 billion Remain bonus, that if we stay on in the EU, our economy, as every economist out there and independent expert has said, will grow faster.
So if Brexit happens, you won't be able to fund this?
Right, so basically it's not a funded pledge, is it? So there's nothing like a business plan. If I'm going to buy something as a businessman, I want to know how it's going to be costed over 5 years. You've got my vote for 5 years. 5 years later, I might vote for someone else. 5 years, I want to know the actual, if there is no tax or it's just a speculation, it's actually it cannot be met, can it?
No, it's not a speculation, because if we are in a position where we can actually influence government policy, we have said that we will be stopping Brexit. So if we are in that position, that's precisely what we'll be doing. And if Brexit is
stopped, if you stop Brexit, you're going to have £50 million, and that's going to go on the childcare. How much will it cost to fund 9 hours of childcare for the majority of parents? Have you worked it out? Have you got?
Oh yes, we have worked out what the entire childcare package costs, and I haven't got the exact number for the entire package. No, I haven't got it on me. Why
but
don't you know? We do have a number.
You just told me that it's something. You're the childcare minister. You've just made the major pledge. Why don't you know? Why should I believe you?
Saul, I just don't have the number on me on every spending pledge that is in the manifesto.
It's not every spending pledge. It's one of the major pledges of your party.
Yes,
I think Jo Swinson in her news conference said it was the biggest pledge.
It is. Look, the number I've got in my mind is something like 4.3 billion.
I've got a number in my mind. It's 165 billion. But
no, it's not. No, because I've read it. But it has been carefully costed. Our manifesto
from what?
Sorry?
From the possible 50 billion that we're going to possibly have.
No. There are two questions. How do you pay for it, and what is it going to cost? Right.
Yes.
And what is it going to cost?
You said it would come from the Remainer bonus.
What is it going to cost? And I'm saying, if I remember it correctly, it's about 4.3 billion. In terms of how we get the money to pay for what it's going to cost, it is the Remain bonus that will be used.
Have you put this in your manifesto? Is it fully costed? Are the numbers
It is in the manifesto.
And is it full costing in the manifesto? Can I go onto it now? Can I read the full costings and can I read the full amount that it's going to be funded from?
The manifesto should tell you.
Everyone listening to this, actually go and check out your business plan.
The manifesto does talk about how our major spending pledges are funded. So
Saul, do me a favour. It sounds like you've got a handful there anyway, but could you go? Have you got time to go online in the course of the next half hour?
Yes, I'm going to do that.
Do that.
Really, I've been waiting for about a month to have it.
Call us back and let us know what it says. Saul, hi, did you find the figures?
Yep, I went on to the manifesto now. There are absolutely no figures. There is a statement which says we'll do it. There is no costings of how much it will cost. So at the moment it's just hot air. I can see that everything's going to be taken out of this estimated 50 billion figure, which seems to have sort of been plucked out of thin air on more estimations. So it sounds like to me that this is just a sort of generalised wish list. And I really want to vote for Liberal Democrats, but I have no confidence in they've actually done any confidence.
So during the break, I managed to actually call the person at HQ who put this together. Right, and I've got the exact number that you're looking for, and I hope that assuages your concern, because if your real concern is you like the policy, how are we going to pay for it, then actually the cost of this entire policy is actually 14 billion. And
so you were only 10 billion out with your earlier estimate.
I did say that I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
And it's 14 billion. And the way that it's paid for
is that over 5 years?
Sorry?
Is that over 5 years or 1 year?
It's 14 billion over the period.
Oh, so that's over 5 years.
Of what?
Yes.
Definitely 5 years.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
You think
and
so? So you don't know.
It's funded by. Can I? So can I just?
Look,
and it's funded
is it 14
by.
billion over 5 years or 1 year? How much is it going to cost over 5 years?
14 billion is what we've got costed in our manifesto, and that's going to be funded by business tax increases. So corporation tax. So we're going to increase corporation tax from 17
by how
to 20,
much?
From 17 to 20%, and also looking at a reform of capital gains tax.
And so it's by hitting small businesses. So I'm self-employed now. This is very good to know. So by hitting small businesses, I'm going to be paying a tax to specifically that tax, the corporation tax. That is the specific tax that's going to pay for the extra childcare. So I think it's a good deal, quite frankly, because if you hit me up 3%. From 17 to 20,
out of your profits,
I might be paying another 5,000 a year. But if I'm saving myself 15,300, that's quite a good deal. But is that where it's coming from? Is that how it's going to be funded, from corporation tax?
Corporation tax increases and reforms to capital gains tax.
Right, and what and how much will that bring in? That extra 3% a year per year. How much will that bring in?
I haven't got the full detailed workings behind every detail here with me in the studio.
Why not? Because this is the point.
No. But the fact that I haven't got it with me doesn't mean we haven't thought about it. Look, Saul, I'm taking.
You've joined a party which relegated on one of their most major promises about the tuition fees, and that's why the Liberal Democrats are so untrusted. And
Saul, you don't sound like someone who's about to vote for the Liberal Democrats.
Saul's just told you he loves this policy. He just wants to know how you're paying for it.
I've told him how we're paying for it. And by the way, By the way, in this campaign
you
so
told me how
far,
I pay for it, but you haven't told me any figures. And the thing is I'm not a fool, and no one else is a fool listening to all this. And people need to see numbers. And if they don't see numbers,
I've given you a number.
You've given me 14 billion over 5 years. That's your specific number, and you haven't told me how much by raising corporation tax by 3%.
Well, I said we'll raise corporation tax and we'll reform capital gains tax.
And will those two changes bring in 14 billion
those two
over 5 years?
Those two changes will be more than enough to fund this pledge.
But it will take at least a year for the money to come in, won't it?
Sorry?
It'll take at least a year for the changes to business tax and capital gains tax to come in.
That's right, yes.
So how are you going to pay for it in the first year?
Well, you've also got to pass the legislation, right? So when you get if you're in a position, you've got to pass the legislation. The legislation doesn't happen on day one.
Do you think it's realistic? 35 hours and 9 months. Why aren't the other parties proposing it? Why shouldn't I vote for the Labour, which is saying 2 years? Why shouldn't I vote for? I haven't read the Conservatives one yet, but why is yours realistic, and why aren't they offering it? If that's such a, is it realistic? Can you realistically?
Because every party has its priorities, and a priority of ours is to support working families. How other parties decide to make what they decide to make their priorities, how they fund, is a question.
Why
for
have
them.
you left the Conservatives? Because that's the Conservatives thing. The Conservatives want to support working people. So what is the key difference between this Liberal Democrats and the Conservative policy? Since you come from the Conservatives, why leave the Conservatives? It seems to be the same thing. What is this realistic? You were the child minister. Is this realistic?
It is.
Or do you think you'll have to water it down if you get into power?
This is realistic and eminently deliverable. And the big difference between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats is that the Conservatives, by pursuing a hard Brexit, are throwing the economic cards up in the air, which means the spending pledges that they are making. And by the way, they have not said a single thing about how they will pay for any pledge that they have made during this campaign, and those pledges are not worth the paper they are written on, because ultimately,
but you haven't written anything on paper, so I don't even know what your pledges were.
Well, actually, I think I can help everybody out here. I'm just looking at analysis from the BBC's education editor, Branwen Jeffries, who I know, and she knows her stuff. And she's written, it's an eye-catching and potentially eye-wateringly expensive election promise. According to the independent economists at the Institute of Fiscal Studies, the Lib Dems' planned expansion of free childcare would represent an extra 13 billion a year.
Right, so it's per year, so it's not over 5 years. So here, I don't know about this. I'm learning. I'm having to ring the radio and find this out, because I'm only ringing up now because it's such an important thing for me that will affect my family, and I couldn't give a two flying. Well,
yes,
sorry,
exactly.
actually, there's parts of Brexit which I obviously want to solve, but
so just bear with me a second. I just want to hear from Sam Gyimah. I mean, Branwen Jeffries saying this is an extra 13 billion a year, and you were saying it's 14 billion over 5 years.
Over
Who's
the period
right?
is what I said, yeah.
Well, but forgive me, don't say over the period. Saul asked you, and I pressed you on whether you meant 5 years.
Someone has just texted me saying it's 14 billion a year as well, so that's right, yes.
Okay. Who's on the text? Should we have them on the programme instead?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, corporation tax by raising it. So for me, I mean, I'm not, I have to tell you,
But we are providing, look. We are providing the figures.
If you went on Dragon's Den, you'd fail. You'd be chucked out.
We are providing the figures, and I did not have it at my fingertips. But that doesn't mean that the figures are not there, and it doesn't mean that the program. This is not a well-costed manifesto pledge.
It's one thing not to have the figures at your fingertips, but you shouldn't say you think it's over 5 years if you don't really know. Can I suggest?
Well, I said that it was over the period,
and we asked you is it over 5 years. We'll check the tape, but you said yes in response to that. You said it was 14 billion over 5 years.
Well,
accuracy is so important, isn't it?
I stand corrected.
Okay,
Thank
right.
you.
What will happen if we haven't left the EU on November the 1st?
The Conservative Party and the country would be in a considerable degree of difficulty, because Boris Johnson has made it clear that we will have left by then. The advantage to the Brexit Party will be very considerable. And if you split the vote between the Brexit Party and the Conservative Party, the only beneficiary is the Labour Party. And that threatens the country with a government led by Jeremy Corbyn, which to my mind would be disastrous for the nation.
Would you still support Boris Johnson if the UK fails to leave the EU on October 31st?
And Boris Johnson has said that we will leave by the 31st, so ask me on the 1st.
Because you see, the thing is, Theresa May, as some of your colleagues repeatedly pointed out, said more than 108 times at the dispatch box in the House of Commons that we'd leave the EU in March, and that didn't happen. So you'll forgive me if I'm slightly sceptical about what party leaders say.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you're right to be, because Theresa May did say it a very large number of times.
So please stop repeating it to me and tell me what you think will happen.
What I'm saying, if you would allow answers to be given to your questions...
I'm not going to allow answers to be avoided.
It hasn't been avoided, you just didn't like it, as I said a moment ago. And those two are clearly different concepts, even if you refuse to accept it. Boris Johnson believes that Brexit is beneficial for the country. He wants to do it. Theresa May always viewed it as a Remainer as a problem to be managed. That is the fundamental difference, which is why I believe Boris Johnson's promise, and indeed Theresa May's turned out to be false. But I do believe what Boris Johnson is saying.
Why do people have trouble trusting Boris Johnson?
I don't know. You've never trusted him. I remember you...
I beg your pardon?
Well, you had a very disagreeable interview with him some years ago. So
I was doing my job.
Is that right?
Yes.
You called him a nasty piece of work, didn't you? Is that your job?
I asked him a question.
It was
I
quite
said, you're
rude,
a nasty piece
wasn't
of work,
it? It was
having
quite...
presented to him evidence that was put to him in a television documentary that
It was
week.
quite rude. It was quite aggressive. You've made it clear you're not a fan in your interviewing style.
Forgive me.
I think people
Forgive
know
me,
you're...
I think you're misunderstanding how interviewing works.
I think you don't like the fact that you're partial, and people know this, and they know you're hostile to Boris Johnson, and it's important
By
that
asking
LBC...
the questions?
Oh, by phrasing them in that extraordinarily hostile, and if I may say so, ill-mannered way. Intemperate way.
Intemperate?
Accusing him of being a nasty piece of work. That was really quite extraordinary, wasn't it?
And that betrays what I think of him, does it?
Are you ashamed of that interview?
Nick Bowles, in our conversation
Now,
earlier,
you're not
said,
answering the question. I just said, are you ashamed of that interview? And you avoided the question. Say there's one rule for the goose and another for the gander. Is there?
I was very happy with the interview.
Oh, you were? Calling somebody a nasty piece of work?
I put it
Seemed
to
to
him
me
in a
a
question.
pretty partial interview.
I put it to him in a question. You understand the difference between a statement and a question, do you?
Very often the two are lied, as you know.
Lied.
Allied.
Forgive
Allied.
me. We're coming back
Allied.
to trust then. Nick Bowles had no trouble saying, and he's worked with Boris Johnson, that he doesn't trust him. Do you?
Mr. Bowles has left the Conservative Party. Yes, I trust Boris Johnson.
Took a long time to get to that answer. You
No, it didn't.
Instead.
No, it didn't. I'm more than happy to have trust Boris Johnson. I've said it many times before. I'll say it again.
Thanks so much for doing that for us. Theo joins us now for Theo's Thoughts. You were here in the studio last night, Theo, and I was expressing some quiet optimism that because Labour and Conservatives were still speaking, then maybe there was hope for their talks, but you were pessimistic, and now we have this statement from Sir Keir Starmer from Labour basically saying the ball's in the government's court.
Eddie, on Tuesday evening, Theresa May gave that statement, didn't she, inside Downing Street, saying it was time to engage with Jeremy Corbyn to try and find a breakthrough in the impasse. Of course, that was muted, that they would have to introduce a permanent customs union. That was Labour's plan. It was what Jeremy Corbyn's team described as their minimum price. And then we had the revolt from the Conservative benches on Wednesday. And that was never actually offered to Sir Keir Starmer from the government side. They were willing to tweak. They weren't even willing to tweak the political declaration. And so now we end up in a situation where we are 3 days further down the line, a week from leaving the European Union on April the 12th, and nothing's been agreed.
Now, what about all these extensions, particularly the one that Theresa May has identified again, June the 30th?
Well, the reason she's gone for June the 30th is that we could put people up, candidates could be fielded in the European elections. They could take part in the European elections, but MEPs don't actually take their seats until July the 2nd. And that's why she has gone for June the 30th. And of course, she's hoping that MEPs would never have to take their seats in the European elections. But of course, Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council, has said that he wants...
Maybe I should just explain, Theo, because as many listeners have said, when do you get time off? When do you get 5 minutes away from the office? And I saw you in the office this morning. You came to the editorial meeting at 9 o'clock, and you're speaking to us from home now. Can you just paint never mind Brexit, just paint a picture of what's going on in front of you, if you will.
I'm being reintroduced. I'm being... No.
Sounds like the Commons.
No, turn the tap off. That's my 4-year-old Eddie.
Yeah.
Trying to flood the garden.
Did you? I presume you explained beforehand Daddy's got to talk on the radio in a moment.
Yeah, I had the television set up. Just watch the television. I've got to explain Brexit.
And I mean,
yeah, different ideas.
Do you want to carry on? I mean,
no. Look, he's flooding the garden. It's over. Let's carry on. The extension that Theresa May's gone for.
Oh, this is great, Theo. I admire your pluck. Do carry on. Don't ignore me.
The extension she's gone for is June 30th. Of course, Donald Tusk, the president of the European Council, wants a year-long extension.
What does he want?
Till March the 30th. And of course, Theresa May wants a much shorter extension. She wants a flex extension. Now, of course, next week on Wednesday night, they're going to have the European Council, led by Donald Tusk. The President is going to make a decision about what's actually possible. Yvette Cooper's bill is also to watch out for next week, because if it passes in time, possibly on Tuesday, it's due to be heard in the House of Lords on Monday, then Theresa May will be bound to accept whatever peers, whatever MPs have approved in terms of the date. The European Council has approved, and then she has to bring it back to MPs in the House of Commons on Thursday. And there's a chance, Eddie, as I was describing to you yesterday, that might just be too stringent a demand to be voted through, and that we could end up in a situation with a no-deal Brexit in a week's time.
Theo, I can't thank you enough. And by the way, if after the flooded garden you need any building work done, I know a guy.
Yes, thank you, Eddie.
I'll let you get on. That's Theo Usherwood at home, if that wasn't completely apparent. And seriously, he finally got sort of half a day off and still volunteered to explain Brexit to us, and we thank him for that. Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor. You said you spoke to Conservative associations across the country and, quote, when you ask them, do you really, and I don't want to make this too personal, but do you really feel that this is the person, talking about Boris Johnson, that you want engaging with the detail of the future of your health and education system? Is this the person you want writing the instructions to the nuclear submarines? I trust Conservative members to arrive at the correct answer. My question to you is, would you trust Boris Johnson writing the instructions to the nuclear submarines?
I think, Eddie, I'm avoiding your question. I'm going to duck your question.
But it's a question you're asking other people to consider.
That's true. Well, and it's not me that's going to make that decision. It's the Conservative members going to make the decision.
Well, you're one of them. Why won't you answer the question you're posing?
Well, Eddie, I'm standing, and what I mean by standing is that I believe that I am the person who is best suited to take Britain through this crisis.
But you can't say whether you trust Boris Johnson to write the instructions to the nuclear submarines, a question you yourself have posed of others.
Because you're asking me to criticise my opponent in the race, and I think it would be undignified.
I'm asking you to give an opinion on a question you yourself have asked.
Eddie, implicit in it is that I believe, and I have to say this without sounding too arrogant, that I would make a better Prime Minister.
Do you trust him
Boris.
or not?
That's why.
On that
that's
point
why I'm
that
standing.
you raised.
So, Eddie, the question of whether or not the Conservative members will trust Boris Johnson is up for them.
Well, what about you?
I feel very strongly that people should trust me.
Even though you won't answer the question you posed?
Eddie, let me try this again. You're tempting me to continue to attack my opponent.
No, I'm tempting you to answer a question you've asked other people to consider. Now, why on earth won't you just... I don't know what you I genuinely don't know what you think. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. And I really just want to hear what you think.
Okay, well, what I think is that I am better placed to get into the details of health and education policy. I am somebody that you could trust to represent Britain on the international stage.
I get that. I get
diplomat
that.
of my life.
But what about the man?
And that I could be trusted more than the other candidates in this race.
What should people make of your reluctance to answer this
Minister.
question that you yourself have asked other people to consider?
Why am I reluctant to answer it? Because
what should they make of your reluctance?
What they should make of it, Eddie, is that I'm trying to make this a debate insofar as I can, and it's very difficult to do because I'm standing against other people, so I have to try to explain politely why I think I would be better at the job than they are. But equally, I don't wish to attack my opponents and get drawn too much into a divisive politics, because really my whole message to the country is we need to come together, we need to unite. I want people to work together. And so yes, we must talk about principles, yes, we must raise those questions, but hammering on about those questions doesn't really sit with the other thing that I'm trying to do, which is to say we have so much in common, and the reason we can be so much a better country, so much a happier country, is because I think Britain is at its very best when it compromises and comes together rather than divides.
In your view, has the European Union oppressed the UK?
Well, as I said, when I was a minister, things that we wanted to do, we were not allowed to do.
And that's
things
oppression,
that we
is it?
No, let me finish. Things that we didn't want to do, we were obliged to do. Now, that is as a result of and that resulted in our not having say over our own laws. And everybody knows that we haven't, because if the EU issue a directive, doesn't matter whether we've objected to it or not, we still have to implement it.
But that's something that people agreed in 1975 we should be part of. That's not oppression, is it? I know you disagree with it, but it's not oppression.
Yes, and after 40 years, we have now reviewed the results of that decision, and we've come to a different one. Now, if you accepted the first decision, which I did, why can't we accept the second decision?
I'm not talking about whether to accept the referendum. I'm saying it's not oppression, is it?
Of course it's oppression. Oppression is what we didn't think we were signing up to, what we thought we were signing up to, and we were deluded. And some people were cleverer and realised, but I didn't. We thought we were signing up to an agreement of sovereign nation states loosely in a tariff agreement. We've ended up with a political union which has actually told us what we've got to do.
You were making this speech today in a room which had people in it who lived through oppression under the Soviet Union.
Indeed.
I wonder how they must have felt listening to you compare membership of the EU with oppression.
Well, I use different sorts of oppression. I might actually have said, if I'd thought about it, I might actually have said as a fourth example, the people rose up against the Soviet Union. I might well have said that as a fourth example. My point is that individual countries should be sovereign and should be able to determine their own laws, their own borders, their own government. That is all that I am saying, and I stand 100% by it.
And Widdecombe, thank you. Last word to you, Femi.
It's just a total lack of self-awareness. I mean, if you can compare the violent oppression, I mean, with the examples she used, the rebellion of the peasantry, the ruling classes were literally killing peasants, the examples of slavery, again, slavery, enslavement and death, and the examples of colonization, which has often resulted in mass murder. The idea that you can compare that to pooling our sovereignty as 28 sovereign nations in order to have a greater say over world affairs is simply immoral.
Yes, good evening, gentlemen. Just very quickly, going back on housing, Damian, you did actually, the Conservative government said in 2015 you'd build 200,000 starter homes. The ONS has just reported you've built exactly none. So I think we can take that any promise you make, you tend to break. But my question is about the document produced by the Conservative Party, which is forwarded by Sajid Javid, the man who says he wants to be our next Chancellor. In that document, you claim that the cost of labour will be £1.2 trillion. That has been totally debunked by myself, by reading 35 pages, and I won't get that back in my life, by people like Full Facts, who pointed out that you've double counted the cost of nationalisation. You use figures which include costings that Labour have not committed themselves to. It also includes, you've overpriced the 2007 Labour manifesto by nearly £300 billion, and according to your figures, £85 billion will be the cost of the 4-day week from Labour, but that's been based on the fact that will happen the day after they come into Parliament.
What's your question, Mark?
My question is, would you like to disassociate yourself from that basically tissues of lies? And to be honest, your leader, who was again lying today, who then said that Labour would bring corporation tax up to the highest level in Europe, which of course is total nonsense because it's 34% in France, where Labour are saying they'd take it to 26%.
So Labour would only add 7% to corporation tax, taking money away from businesses.
His point was
and,
Boris Johnson lied about the figure.
His
point was Boris Johnson lied about the figure.
Well, we've got the lowest corporation tax, but let me deal with some of the points.
No, Mark's point was that Boris Johnson claimed today that Labour would introduce the highest corporation tax in Europe. Do you agree that's nonsense?
Well, I don't know what Labour would do in their second budget. They've already promised to increase it to 28%, I think, so it could go higher. But quite a lot, I disagree flatly with a lot of what Mark said.
What about Sajid Javid's claim in this document? I mean, independent experts, including Full Fact, have debunked a lot of it.
I was going to go this idea that it somehow underestimated the cost of nationalisation. Actually, it's almost the other way around. Labour claim that nationalising part of BT so that the internet would be run by the government, and that would be fun, wouldn't it? But
the double counting, the exaggeration,
that would cost 20 billion. Actually,
do you dissociate yourself from that?
No, I don't. BT said it would be at least double that. So I think they probably know how much they're worth.
Mark, do you want to come back?
Yes, I'll come back on that. Right, so I don't like being told I get my facts wrong because I work on facts. That's why I'm a floating voter. Right, you used the £196 billion number from the CBI for nationalisation. That's the number they came up with, saying that would be the cost for Labour to nationalise the industries it was planning to do. That number was then repeated in that document because of pledges that the Labour Party had made about nationalisation. You double counted it in that document. That is a fact. So don't tell me I have my numbers wrong. It's a total lie, and it seems to me that you're all following this new leader of yours who tends to say a lie every day.
Can I say gently, you don't sound like a floating voter, Mark. But the...
well, why not? Because he's committed to asking you questions.
No. Yeah, well, no, because he's just spraying the word lie around. But can I take...
Well, but floating voters might well be concerned about the Prime Minister lying.
Can I take the point about the CBI? The CBI knows what... they're as good an independent observer as anyone on the cost of nationalisation. Yes, independent.
Okay.
I mean, they are. They've had rows with governments of all sorts. And the other point is whether or not we can count. The other point Mark made was that we shouldn't necessarily listen to policies that are merely committed to by the Labour Party conference, which has been one of the controversies about this document.
Well, wait for the manifesto. Why don't you cost it then?
Because the number of times I've heard Labour politicians sententiously say, "We are a democratic party. Our conference." We are a democratic party that listens to our conference. Well, if they do, these are just the policies that
we can hear you making noises.
Hang on. I'm not going to accept this. Sorry. Right. So your Prime Minister, you've asked me to use the word lie. I spoke to Jo Simpson the other day on a national radio station, and I told her what I thought about her 1% surplus budget, and could she explain it? And she couldn't. So yes, I am a floating voter. So how dare you claim that I'm not? And I have voted for different political parties because I look at the facts. Your Prime Minister said that he's going to build 40 new hospitals. The facts, we know it actually means 6. Your Prime Minister said that he's going to spend £34 billion on the NHS. We know that in real terms that is £20 billion. He said he was going to spend £14 billion on education. We know for a fact that's £4 billion. So please don't accuse me of being anything than what I'm saying on this radio station. The only people I think the country are seeing who are consistently not telling us the truth, led by a leader who consistently won't tell us about what's in the Russian report, why didn't he declare his interest in that young lady, which is now being investigated? There must be at least 5 investigations around the Prime Minister at the moment, and he's still sitting there, and the Conservatives are letting him. And I'd be saying this if you were a Liberal, a Labour, or any other party.
Okay, well, let me take the first point you make about the hospitals. What we've said, very, very openly, is that the first 6 of those hospitals will be built between 2020 and 2025, and that we're already committing the seed money to prepare to build the other 34 between 2025 and 2030.
Well, then don't say 40 new hospitals when we're coming up to an election.
Because there will be 40 new hospitals in the next decade.
Well, another 40 in 100 years. That's not the point.
No, the point is there'll be 40 in the next decade, and that was made perfectly clear when that announcement was made. So to attempt to say it's only 6 is just wrong. And also, we can argue about whether it's cash or real terms, but in the end, the 33.9 billion for the NHS is what will be being spent.